I want you to stop for a moment. Not slow down. Stop. Because what I am about to tell you is not something you process while doing something else. It is not background content. It is not information you file away for later. What I am about to tell you requires the rarest thing a human being can offer in this age of constant noise and endless distraction. It requires your full presence, and I'm asking for it, not because this video deserves it, but because you do. Because the thing I am going to name in the next 22 minutes has been shaping every relationship you have ever had, every conflict that still lives unresolved somewhere in your body, every moment you felt completely alone in the presence of another person, every time you gave everything you had, and it still was not received the way you intended it. Every time you were certain you were right and they were certain they were right and you were both telling the complete truth. What I am going to name is the reason for all of it, and its name is simple. So simple that when you first hear it, part of you will want to move past it too quickly, because the mind that has been protecting you your entire life will recognize correctly that if you really let this land, if you really let it go all the way in, something is going to change. Something fundamental, something that cannot be unchanged. Here it is. You and I do not live in the same world. Not metaphorically, not philosophically. Not as a poetic way of saying we have different opinions or different backgrounds or different tastes. I mean it in the most literal, most neurological, most embodied sense available. The world you wake up into every morning, the world that feels so completely real, so self-evident, so obviously just the way things are, is not the same world I wake up into. Is not the same world your partner wakes up into. Is not the same world your mother or your father or your closest friend or your greatest enemy inhabits. Is not the same world the person who hurt you most deeply was living in when they did what they did. There is not one world that all human beings share, filtered through slightly different personalities and preferences and opinions. There are as many worlds as there are human nervous systems, as many realities as there are people who were shaped by experiences they did not choose, in bodies that learned what was safe and what was dangerous, in relationships that taught them, before they had words, before they had the capacity to question what they were being taught, what reality was. Gabor Maté spent 50 years sitting with human beings in their most honest and most desperate moments, in prisons, in palliative care wards, in addiction treatment centers, in the offices of physicians who had run every test and found nothing wrong and still their patients were suffering, in rooms where people had finally stopped pretending. And what he found, what he documented with the precision of a scientist and the compassion of someone who had done his own deepest work, was this: the suffering is never random. The patterns are never accidental. The world each person is living in was built with absolute intelligence from the specific materials of their specific life. And until that world is seen, until the person inside it can recognize the construction, can feel the edges of the lens, can ask for the first time whether what they are seeing is what is actually there, the suffering continues. The patterns repeat. The world reproduces itself with the faithfulness of a living thing. This is where everything begins. And this is where we begin today. I need to take you inside something that Gabor Maté described in a way that I have never been able to forget. He was speaking about a patient, a man in his 50s, successful by every external measure, completely unable to understand why his marriage kept failing, why his children felt distant, why he felt, in the private hours of the night, a loneliness so complete it had become indistinguishable from his sense of himself. And Gabor Maté asked him something that no one had ever asked him before. He asked, "When you were a child, was there space in your home for your sadness?" And the man looked at him and said, not with bitterness, not with blame, but with the simple honesty of someone finally being asked the right question, "No, there was not." And Gabor Maté said, "Then you have been living in a world where sadness has no place. And every relationship you have ever been in has been experienced through that world. And every person who has ever come to you with their sadness has been, without either of you knowing it, asking you to feel something in yourself that your world was built to keep out." The room was silent, because everyone in it recognized something, not about that man, about themselves. This is what Gabor Maté means when he talks about the world we live in, not the political world or the cultural world or the socio-economic world, though all of those matter and all of those shape us. He means the interior world, the felt world, the world of the body and the nervous system and the pre-verbal, pre-rational knowing that was laid down in the earliest years of life and has been operating as reality, as the only reality, ever since. And the building of that world, the specific architecture of the reality you inhabit, began before you can remember, before language, before the capacity for abstract thought. In the period that neuroscience now understands to be the most neurologically formative of an entire human life, the period when the brain is building its most fundamental models of what the world is, of what other people are, of what you need to do or be or suppress in order to remain connected to the people you cannot survive without. Gabor Maté is unambiguous about this. He says we do not inherit our character. We develop it in response to our environment, in response to the specific emotional climate of our earliest relationships, in response to whether our needs were met or unmet, whether our feelings were welcomed or suppressed, whether we learned that being fully ourselves was safe, or whether we learned, through the most ordinary, the most human, the most inevitable imperfections of the people who raised us, that some parts of us needed to stay hidden. And every child makes an adaptation. Every child, with the extraordinary intelligence of a nervous system designed for survival above all other priorities, figures out what their particular world requires. Which emotions are permitted, which needs are safe to express, which version of themselves maintains the connection they cannot live without. And they build their world around those discoveries. They build a self around those discoveries. And then they grow up, and they carry that world and that self into every subsequent relationship, into every subsequent conflict, into every subsequent moment of love or loss or confusion or grief, without knowing they are doing it, without knowing that the world they are living in is a construction, without knowing that the person standing in front of them, the partner, the child, the colleague, the stranger, is living in an entirely different world, built from entirely different materials, running an entirely different model of what reality is. And this invisibility of our own worlds to ourselves, is the source of more human suffering than almost anything else Gabor Maté identified in 50 years of clinical work. Because when you do not know that you are living in a constructed world, you cannot question it. You cannot examine it. You treat your interpretation of events as the events themselves. You treat your emotional responses as accurate reports of what is happening rather than as predictions generated by a nervous system running on old data. You treat the story your world tells about other people as the truth about other people rather than as a story about your history with a particular type of experience. And so you suffer, and you make others suffer, not from cruelty, from blindness. The particular blindness of someone who has never been shown that they are wearing a lens. If this is landing somewhere in your body right now, if you feel that specific quality of recognition that Gabor Maté described as the ache of being truly seen, I want you to drop 777 in the comments right now. Not as a symbol, not as a performance, as an act of honesty. As a signal from the part of you that already knows this is true to the part of you that is still deciding whether to let it in. When you type 777, you are saying, I am here. I am paying attention. I am willing to see the world I have been living in. Type it. And then stay with me, because now I want to go deeper. I want to give you something specific, something you can use not just to understand this idea, but to actually feel it, to actually locate it in your own life, to actually begin the extraordinary and terrifying and profoundly liberating work of seeing your own world. Gabor Maté identified what I want to call the 7 faces of the constructed world. 7 places where your world reveals itself most clearly. 7 windows into the specific architecture of the reality you have been inhabiting. And I want to walk you through each one, not so that you can diagnose yourself, not so that you can build a new story about why you are the way you are, but so that you can begin to see. Because seeing, genuine seeing, is where everything changes. The first face is the face of your strongest reactions. The moments when what you feel seems larger than what is happening, when a canceled plan produces devastation, when a mild criticism floods you with shame that has nothing to do with the content of what was said, when a pause in conversation feels like the end of connection. Gabor Maté says these moments are not overreactions. They are perfect reactions to something that happened a long time ago in a world that taught you that this particular kind of event meant something specific and terrible. The present event is simply a cue. The charge belongs to the history. And every time you feel a reaction that seems disproportionate to the present moment, your world is showing itself to you. It is showing you the specific texture of what it was built to fear. The second face is the face of what you cannot receive, not what you cannot give. Most people who have built their worlds around early experiences of emotional unavailability or conditional love become extraordinary givers. They give generously, sometimes to the point of complete self-erasure, but receiving, genuinely openly, without immediately trying to earn it or repay it or explain why you deserve it. Receiving is where the world reveals itself. Because if your world was built in an environment where your needs were too much, or where love came with conditions, or where accepting help meant being vulnerable in a way that was once dangerous, then receiving will feel in your body like a risk, like something you need to be careful about, like something that costs more than it gives. Gabor Maté sat with dying people who had spent their entire lives giving and could not receive care even in their final days. The world they lived in had no room for their own needs, and the body had been saying so for years. The third face is the face of your recurring relationship dynamic. Not the specific people, the dynamic. The emotional pattern that reproduces itself across different relationships, different contexts, different decades. You leave one relationship and enter another, and months or years later find yourself feeling the same familiar feelings. Unseen, or engulfed, or abandoned, or not enough, or too much. Gabor Maté is precise about this. He says the nervous system does not seek happiness in relationships. It seeks familiarity. It seeks the emotional texture it learned to navigate in its earliest attachments, not because it wants to suffer, but because familiar danger feels more manageable than unfamiliar safety. The world reproduces itself because the nervous system trusts what it knows, and what it knows is what it first learned. The fourth face is the face of your body's chronic condition, the tension that lives in particular places, the jaw, the shoulders, the chest, the gut, that does not fully release even in moments of rest. The fatigue that sleep does not resolve. The symptoms that medicine has investigated and found no clear cause for. Gabor Maté spent decades making the case, supported now by extensive neuroscientific research, that the body is not separate from the world we inhabit. The body is the world's most faithful record. Every adaptation, every suppression, every emotion that was not safe to feel, every need that was not safe to express, the body has been holding it, not as metaphor, as physiology, as the actual, measurable, biological consequence of what the nervous system learned it needed to do to survive. Your body is not betraying you. Your body is telling you everything your world has been keeping from your awareness. The fifth face is the face of your relationship with your own anger. Because anger, genuine, boundaried, self-respecting anger, requires a world in which your own experience matters, in which your needs are real, in which you are permitted to say, this is not acceptable to me, this has gone too far, this is not who I am willing to be in this relationship. And many people, particularly people whose early worlds required the suppression of their own needs in order to maintain connection, do not have access to that anger. They have access to resentment, which is anger turned inward. They have access to explosive rage, which is suppressed anger finally overflowing its container. But clean, clear, boundaried, self-respecting anger, the kind that says no and means it without guilt, without apology, without the immediate need to smooth over the discomfort it created, that requires a world that permits it. Gabor Maté says, show me what a person does with their anger, and I will show you the world they grew up in. The sixth face is the face of your internal narrator. The voice, or perhaps more accurately, the presence, that provides the constant running commentary on your experience. The one that evaluates, judges, explains, justifies, and above all, maintains the coherence of the story of who you are. Because every world has a story, a creation account, an explanation for why things are the way they are that feels so completely self-evident that questioning it feels almost like questioning reality itself. And that story, the one your narrator tells about you, about others, about what is possible and what is not the truth. It is the world speaking. It is the prediction the nervous system learned to generate, dressed in the language of self-knowledge. Gabor Maté says, the most dangerous stories we tell are the ones we have told so many times we have forgotten they are stories. The seventh face, and this is the one that Gabor Maté returned to with the most tenderness, the most care, the most personal honesty, is the face of your relationship with yourself. Not how you perform yourself to others, not the image you maintain, but the quality of your private relationship with your own experience. Whether you can sit with yourself in discomfort without immediately reaching for something to make the discomfort stop. Whether you can feel what you feel without immediately judging whether the feeling is reasonable. Whether you can make a mistake without the internal response being devastation or shame, or the urgent need to explain and justify until the mistake has been rendered completely understandable. The world you live in taught you how to treat yourself. And how you treat yourself, in private, in the moments no one sees, is the clearest map available of the world that built you. Now, I want to speak directly to what Gabor Maté identified as the most important question. Not what is wrong with you, not what happened to you, though that matters enormously, but what happened to you teach you about what was real? What conclusions did your nervous system draw in the wordless, embodied, absolutely logical way that nervous systems draw conclusions about the nature of the world, about what you were worth, about what other people could be trusted to give, about what love required you to be? Because those conclusions are your world, and your world is not your enemy. It is the most loyal thing you have. It has been protecting you with extraordinary faithfulness at extraordinary cost from the dangers it learned about in your earliest years. It has been running the prediction, generating the interpretation, building the story, maintaining the adaptation, doing everything a world does to keep its inhabitants safe. The tragedy, and Gabor Maté named this tragedy with a clarity that I have found nowhere else, is that the world keeps running the old protection in a present that no longer requires it, that the nervous system keeps bracing for the impact of a danger that passed decades ago, that the adaptation that was once the most intelligent response available to a child with limited options becomes, in adulthood, the prison that looks from the inside like simply the way things are. And the only question that matters is whether you are willing to see it, not fix it, not overcome it, not transcend it or replace it or optimize it. See it. Gabor Maté is very clear that healing does not begin with change. It begins with seeing, with the genuine, compassionate, non-defensive recognition of the world you have been inhabiting, with the willingness to hold it, to hold the specific construction of your specific reality, not with shame, not with the demand that you should have known better, but with the same quality of tender understanding that you would offer to any person who built a shelter from whatever materials were available and has been living in it ever since, believing it was the only shelter that existed. Because here is what becomes possible the moment you see your world. The moment you recognize the construction, feel the edges of the lens, hold the template up to the light, something shifts. Not immediately, not completely, but genuinely. The world's grip on your experience loosens just enough to create a gap. A tiny, precious, life-changing gap between what happens and what your world says it means, between the cue and the prediction, between the event and the interpretation. And in that gap, in that breath of space between the stimulus and the response, something extraordinary is available. The actual present, the actual person in front of you, the actual moment with its actual texture and its actual possibilities, unmediated by the urgent certainty of a nervous system still running a model of a world that no longer exists. Gabor Maté called this presence, and he said, from 50 years of sitting with human beings at the furthest edges of their suffering, that presence is the most healing force available to a human life. Not the presence of someone else, though that matters. Your own presence to your own experience. Your own willingness to be genuinely here, in this body, in this moment, with this feeling, in this actual world, rather than the constructed one. That presence is not a technique. It is not something you achieve and then possess. It is something you practice, moment by moment. In the ordinary encounters of an ordinary day, every time you notice a reaction and ask what this feeling remembers, every time you feel the pull of the familiar and pause long enough to ask whether familiar is the same as true, every time you turn toward your own experience, the discomfort, the grief, the longing, the fear, with compassion rather than judgment, with curiosity rather than condemnation, every one of those moments is a world expanding. And a world that expands, that allows in what it was built to keep out, that softens its borders, that discovers that the danger it has been bracing for does not arrive. That world heals. Not all at once, not without grief, not without the particular ache that comes when you begin to see how much of life has been lived inside a smaller room than the one that was available, but genuinely, irreversibly, in the direction of the fullness that was always your birthright. I want to say something to those of you who are feeling, as you sit with all of this, a quality of grief that is different from ordinary sadness. The grief of recognition. The grief of understanding, perhaps for the first time, the specific shape of the world you have been living in and what it has cost you. What connections were filtered through its lens before you could experience them clearly? What love was within reach that the world said was not safe? What parts of yourself were present and available and real that the world said needed to stay hidden? Let that grief be present. Do not manage it back into explanation. Do not immediately convert it into a plan for how things will be different now. Gabor Maté says the grief that is finally allowed to be felt is not the wound reopening. It is the wound finally, for the first time, completing the process that the world interrupted when it decided feeling was too dangerous. Feel it. Let it move. And know that what comes after, What Gabor Maté witnessed in person after person who had the courage to see their world and grieve what it had cost them. What comes after is not just relief. It is a different quality of aliveness, a different quality of presence, a way of being in the world that is no longer at war with itself, that is no longer spending its energy bracing for the impact of a danger that passed, that is finally genuinely actually here, here in this body, here in this moment, here in the actual world, larger and stranger and more full of real possibility than the constructed one has ever been. That world is available to you. Not someday. Not once you have healed enough or understood enough or changed enough of the patterns that your world has been generating. Now, in this moment, in the gap between the world you have been living in and the world you are beginning to see, Gabor Maté said something in the last years of his public work that I want to give to you as the thing you carry from this conversation. He said, I have never met a person who was broken. I have met people who were hurt, people who adapted, people who built worlds from the materials of their pain and then lived in those worlds so faithfully, so completely, that they forgot there was anything outside them. But broken, no. Never broken. Always beneath the construction, beneath the adaptation, beneath the world, a self, whole, real, waiting. That self is waiting in you. It has been waiting with extraordinary patience through every year of every pattern you have tried to break and could not, through every relationship that reproduced the familiar, through every night of the particular loneliness that has no name because it lives inside connection rather than outside it, through every moment you are present in body and absent everywhere else that matters. It has been waiting for this, for the willingness to see the world you have been living in, for the courage to ask whether it is the only world available, for the readiness to stand at the edge of the construction and look out at what is beyond it. And what is beyond it? What Gabor Maté devoted his life to pointing toward, in every lecture, in every book, in every hour of sitting with another human being in their most honest moment, what is beyond it is not a better world. It is the world, the actual one, the one that was always there, just on the other side of the lens, and you were always going to find your way to it. Because something in you, something below the world, below the adaptation, below the prediction, has been navigating toward it your entire life. That something is who you truly are. And the privilege of a lifetime, the one that Gabor Maté witnessed people arriving at, sometimes in the last weeks of their lives, sometimes with decades still ahead of them, always with that particular quality of homecoming that happens when a long journey finally reaches its real destination. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who your world told you that you were, not who your early experiences shaped you to believe you had to be, but who you truly are, beneath the world, beyond the construction, in the actual, present, luminous, unrepeatable reality of this one life. That life is yours. It always was. Come home to it.